Okay, brilliant. I'm going to get going there. So welcome to everybody from hi James, the first webinar from the Mental Health Sustainability Programme delivered today by our private sector partner Deloitte. I'm extremely grateful to their help in setting up and supporting us with this undertaking. And you will see Deloitte, many more of their colleagues as we move through the webinar series, which is lovely. Today we've got Georgie Rhodes delivering the content on the basics of marketing with a particular view towards digital marketing. So Georgie will share some slides and talk through the content in due course. At the end, we'll run a Q&A, so we'll address any questions that had been submitted on the Eventbrite, and then any through the chat box or Q&A box here, and then we will proceed to ask you to unmute yourselves and ask any outstanding questions. But hopefully you'll appreciate if we have to either park those for answering after or signpost to a colleague or a further resource. Should alert you also to the fact that the webinar is being recorded. So we've a growing number, but about 17 with us today. We invited around 60 organisations, so each of those members of the association who can watch through our members area later. So anything you write in the chat, etc., will be available after the fact. We'll seek your feedback formally after the session and ask you to contribute to shape the webinar series to be as effective for you as we want it to be. So, you know, I ask for your participation today and after. That would be really appreciated by us. But really, it just leaves me to introduce Georgie, who will kick off this webinar series with the Marketing 101 session. So over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'm Georgie from Deloitte, and my background is actually in digital marketing. So I've worked for various organisations delivering their marketing. So hopefully that experience will be helpful as I talk through the slides today. So I think everyone can now see my screen. So we'll get started. So this is kind of a digital marketing 101 course, so hopefully the basics of everything that you would need to know in your role. So in terms of what does that mean, basics of digital marketing? Well, various things I'm going to cover today. So a few definitions in the first instance, so how you can get started. Why it's important, so a bit of more information about customers and how you can really think with the customer in mind and try and map out some activity that will match what they want with what you want. Then I'll touch upon the digital customer journey, so deep dive into a few more of the channels that you can use, so from social media to search to SEO, and then with a bit more of a spotlight on SEO in particular, so search engine optimization and how you can get your website to appear higher in Google, and then unpick some of that black box, which is Google. And then finally, finishing on kind of best practice around budgets. If you have some marketing budget, what should you be doing with it? And generally just what some do's and don'ts, which should hopefully be handy. So starting with kind of what is marketing. So I'm sure, as you all know, it covers a whole range of activities, and there's lots of jargon. It's easy to get overwhelmed with all of the different terms. So I thought I'd start with this kind of simple framework to help you understand that a bit more. So you may have seen it before. It's product, price, promotion, and place. And so today's session will focus largely on promotion. So things like in particularly digital marketing, but traditionally things like advertising, publicity, sales, and positioning. But the other ways that you can get people interested in your product is obviously kind of the other three P's as well. So the product itself, what's the packaging, what are the kind of unique selling points of the product, what's the branding? You know, if you think about something like Apple, it's probably 99% the branding as opposed to anything else, which is why people buy it. And then price. Obviously, you can change your price in terms of putting on offers and discounts, maybe kind of a subscription model, and you can change your price to influence how appealing your product is. And then finally, place. So there's definitely a role for kind of, certainly if you think about stores, where they are positioned and kind of whether they're in the top position on the high street as to how attractive your proposition is to customers. But as I say, this session will focus largely on promotion. So in particular, digital marketing, which I'll go into now, but other ways you could promote your product include direct marketing. So those kind of, it's actually had a resurgence recently with lockdown, you might be interested to know, but historically very popular, kind of getting those direct mails through your door. The white companies still do them a lot, for example. Public relations, so it's when you get your product in the press. And then it could range from anything, also from advertising. So again, historically, lots of companies are advertising on the television and things like that. But I guess the reason why we wanted to focus on digital marketing today is not only because it's where your customers are, but also kind of it's a good entry point. You know, it's difficult for the average company to go and purchase some advertising space on a top slot on telly, but actually digital marketing is accessible to everybody on any budget. And so it provides a really good avenue to finding your customers and to driving sales and interest in your product right from the beginning without requiring a huge amount of spend. So if that sounds interesting, I'll dive in a bit more. So again, digital marketing is a term that's used often, and as the slide suggests, it's a real big focus for all organizations, big and small, from a marketing perspective. And so what it is using all of kind of the digital platforms and technology to engage with your customers. So across all of these 5 areas, there's definitely a role within digital marketing. So whether that's looking at devices, what are the different platforms? So I mentioned platforms. So is it you're going through Facebook? Is it Instagram? Is it Google, where your customers are or where you want to access them? Data is at the heart of everything. So I'm sure you know this, but every activity that you take on a website is tracked. So whether you click on a certain banner, whether you leave and then come back, where you came from. So did you type something into Google and then click on a website, whether that's ASOS or anywhere? Every single thing you do online is always tracked. So as I'm sure you've seen as well, often you might find if you've looked at a product on a website, you then see that product following you around the internet, whether you like it or not. And so I'm sure you guys know that kind of that tracking and that kind of data is everywhere on your customers, and you can use it to your advantage. And then technology, so there's all sorts that you can do in there. So whether that's your website or a mobile app, there's lots of different kind of avenues you can go there. But the focus of this session is on the last one, so that's digital media. So how they tend to be grouped is through paid, owned and earned, which I'll go into in a bit more detail in a couple of slides time. But essentially that's all of the different channels you can use digitally to get to your customers. And I'll explain that a bit further shortly. Before I do that, I think starting with the customer is absolutely key. So I don't know if you've seen any frameworks before or have thought about it from this perspective in terms of what do your customers want from you, or what are they doing kind of before they come to purchase. So as I'm sure you can relate to when you do a purchase yourself online, there's a lot more to it than just going on a website buying a product. So how do you get there? And so I think it's interesting to think about it in terms of a customer journey. So right from the beginning, it might be that customers are looking for inspiration. A lot of the time people are double screening, so they've got their telly on, maybe an ad's come on and they've thought, actually I will just get my phone up and browse. I'm looking at social media, whether Instagram, and I've seen a product I quite like, or an influencer is wearing something I like. So people are looking to be inspired. They're looking for a different content, and they might then become aware of certain products and brands. Then they've kind of got an active interest at this point, and they're looking to browse and do some research. So let's say someone's looking for a sofa. and they've seen something they quite like, and now they've got an appetite for it. I would like to keep looking and see whether I can find the best price, or the best delivery cost, or the best delivery time. And so they're then at the point of researching, looking at different retailers, looking at different options, and really browsing. Then they get to the point where they're making the selection. They're validating what they're doing. So they might be looking at ratings and reviews and say, right, actually that sofa hasn't got very good reviews, so I think I'm going to purchase from another site. And that takes them to the point of purchasing. And then finally, that's kind of not the end of the journey. As I'm sure you know, actually in retail, you tend to get at least 25% returns, especially on clothing and things like that. So that's not where the journey ends. So that they could be that they've decided to return the product, or even if they decided to keep it, they can submit some feedback, or the dialogue might continue with your customer service around when their product's going to arrive, or other details kind of in the post-purchase journey. And I think the numbers across the bottom, the percentages, are referring to the extent to which digital is used at each of these stages. So I think there's, as you can see, the lowest is kind of at the purchase stage. So you can see there that offline retail is still playing a massive role, but regardless of that, there's still a really solid role for digital right across the journey from beginning to end. So looking at that and unpicking that slightly more, so when you think about those different stages of the journey, going down on the left, right from inspiration to loyalty, where a customer has received the product and maybe wants to purchase again, it's worth thinking about kind of what can you do to communicate with them at each of the different stages, and what are questions you could be asking yourself about what their needs might be throughout each phase. So there's some thought starters here on the slide, so I won't talk through them all, but things like, from an inspiration perspective, to start with, what is your offering and how is it different to other offerings? Using the sofa example again, is it comfort? Is it price? Is it ease of delivery? Is it style? And what are other people saying? So again, that advocacy point and the reviews that I mentioned right at the bottom end, coming up towards the top and going full circle, really, because that word of mouth and positive feedback, really important to get people inspired as well. And thinking about when they're considering their options. So when I mentioned they're doing a bit of research online, they're looking at different retailers, what factors might be at play there? So I think experience is something that we hear spoken about more and more. So not just kind of what's the product, but actually what are you offering them from an experience perspective. You might see on social media, for example, that lots of content is not necessarily product driven from different brands, because they're trying to establish a relationship with the customer that's not just about the product. So they're trying to make them laugh, do a few like memes and humorous content, or it might be kind of inspirational fashion content that's not got a direct selling message. So I think there's lots kind of to get after there in terms of building that deeper connection with customers. When it comes to selection, I think it gets a bit more product focused at this point. So it's a bit more functional. Customers might be more concerned about how convenient purchasing is. And I think we've probably all experienced frustration online before when the website stops working, or it drops just at the credit card portion when you're trying to enter your details. There is nothing more frustrating than that. So I think that kind of comes to the functionality of your site. Is it actually working from a purchase perspective? And then the bottom two, more around kind of the customer service and the comms at the back end post purchase. Is it easy for customers to get in touch if they have a query? Again, there can be nothing more frustrating than not being able to access customer service and not feeling like you're being rewarded if you've purchased more than once, for example. Is there a benefit to that? And then finally, kind of bringing it full circle around referral of friends and family. and that word of mouth piece, is it something that you'd recommend to a friend, and getting that positive sentiment around the product and the service, really important. So with that in mind, the different customer stages and what their needs might be at those different stages, what can you do, and what channels should you be using online to try and drive those behaviours, and try and get those outcomes? So I won't talk through this kind of in absolute detail, but I think this brings it back to your business objectives. So what can you as organisations do, and how? So as you can see across the top, you've got the objectives that are exactly aligned to those customer stages. So right from generating awareness of your product and service, right through to getting someone to be a retained customer and a repeat customer. You can take them all through the journey. And as you can see from the channels information across the bottom, lots of the channels play multiple roles here. So they can be used to inspire, but they can also be used right through to loyalty. So I think social media, I would pull out as an example here, that social features throughout. And I think that there's definitely a view now that it's not just, oh, well, you only use social for inspiration when people are right at the beginning of their purchase journey, or you don't use social media to try and drive purchasing behavior. Because now actually it can be used right across the board. As I'm sure you guys might have examples of when you've purchased something from seeing it on social media. There's definitely that connection between content and commerce is really blending now. And so it's not necessarily as simple as this is content and this is sales. So that blending is becoming more important. But this does give you a guide as to what to use for which. So for example, if you think from a customer perspective, it's probably when they're looking for inspiration that they might use search, and when they're comparing other brands. Whereas when they're coming to kind of select the product, they've already done that sort of initial research. So it's helpful to think about it from this perspective. So earlier I mentioned paid, owned and earned media or channels. And so I wanted to touch back on that just to check that you to define those terms for you and help you to understand them in a bit more detail. So as well as classifying the channels in terms of the customer funnel stage, customer funnel meaning what mindset they're at, you can also classify the channels by which ones you might pay for, which ones you own, and then which are earned or generated organically. So paid advertising, probably familiar with most of these. So online display is what I mentioned earlier, when you get those adverts that follow you around the internet, whether that's on the Daily Mail or in your email inbox. That's generally where you tend to see them. Those are paid for on a either on a view basis, so you can pay for those adverts based on the number of views that people are getting, or you can pay for clicks. I would say that generally people don't click on those ads. It might not surprise you. I think on average they've got like a 0.1% click-through rate. So if you want people to get to your website, I wouldn't use that. That's not to say there's not a use for it. It's definitely more of an awareness driving activity, but it's not something that will get a lot of clicks to the site. Similarly, you can use social media. So you've all, I'm sure, seen sponsored ads on social media. So not just from the people that you follow, but from brands who you don't follow, and they've targeted you for specific reasons with advertising, whether that's on Instagram, on an Instagram story, or on Facebook in your newsfeed. There's various ways that you can do that. SEM stands for search engine management. I actually call it PPC. So it's called all sorts of different things. And that's the paid version of Google. So where if you're doing a Google search, you will have again seen sponsored links and also natural links. So where so you can pay for a sponsored link to turn up for certain searches. So whether that's, say, back to the sofa example, it might be that you really want to appear for white sofa or comfortable sofa. So you can pay to for those positions. I think someone's raised their hand. I'm happy to answer a question now if you like, or if you can hold on till the end. Also happy to do it that way.
Hi, Georgie. Sorry, I can't see the participant who's raised their hand, but I can see. Oh, it was a mistake. Sorry.
Oh, no worries.
But we do have a question for later. We can save them. I will address that one you've put in, Melvin. Thank you, Kerry, for clarifying that. Yeah, please continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there's not loads of slides, by the way, so definitely will be time for questions. So that's paid search, or the paid version of Google. And then SEO, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail shortly, is the free version of Google advertising. So in other words, it means search engine optimization, but what it is how you can get your link to the top of the Google search results for free. And I'll go on to talk about it, but it's essentially a bit of a black box in terms of how Google ranks the pages. But there are definitely things you can do to try and improve that. And then sponsorships. So I'm sure you're familiar. These days, it's usually things like influencers on Instagram or Facebook, where they've been paid to feature certain products. And then from an owned perspective, so digital properties that you can actually make a page for yourself, and you don't have to pay for it. You can build up your followers organically. So those are things like website and mobile, social media and blog sites, but also SEO, as I mentioned, is kind of in inverted commas free. And then finally email. So I think email is really important, because once you've got that customer who's reasonably engaged or engaged enough to have been on your website or signed up for your email messages, or even better, purchased from you, that is such a valuable asset. And then that's someone that, if you've captured their email, that you can then contact afterwards with other relevant messages, obviously at no cost. So that's a really important one. And then finally, earned. So that's value that you've got from earning it. So in other words, things like social media mentions and shares. So it might be that you've done a post and then someone has shared it. So that gets you kind of an incremental value and visibility that you didn't pay for and that you don't own yourself. Or it might be reviews. So product reviews on websites, I mentioned them earlier. That obviously has a value attached that you don't pay for. Or user-generated content. So that's becoming really popular, as I'm sure you will have seen with different brands, where they're using, as for example, as seen on you. It might be that they have a fashion site, and not just the model pictures or the kind of professionally shot pictures, but actually they're increasingly using kind of customer pictures, and that there's a real value to that as well, because people can then kind of imagine themselves in the product. So then zooming in a little bit more on SEO. So as I mentioned, you've got SEM, which is the paid links. So if you picture a Google page results, it might be that you type in white sofa, and at the top you get a sponsored link, and it will say very clearly sponsored. And then the other links underneath don't say that, will be those kind of organic links or derived from kind of search engine optimization. And so how do companies get to the top of the page? It's a very good question, and only Google knows. But we can definitely demystify some of that. So a lot of it is about how your website is structured. So in the back end, kind of, is it optimized? Are all the pages distinct, or is there a lot of content that's the same? Google has this kind of robot that reads your website and makes that decision based on a number of factors, and chooses then to index your site depending on how relevant it thinks it is, or how legitimate and kind of useful. So looking at that in a bit more detail, why is it important? So think we've touched upon kind of how prominent digital is, but also kind of a few more stats to bring that to life. So you've got kind of 3/4 of customers using a search engine during that consideration and purchase phase of the journey. So not just for discovery, where you've got just over 70% using it, but actually during that really crucial, what am I going to buy? Am I choosing between different people? 3/4 of people looking at search for that. So it's really important to be prominent, or as prominent as you can be, across all of these areas in the blue chart. So that shows kind of all of the decision-making journey when people are making a purchase. And just to build, I guess, a little bit more in terms of what different searches are. So this will hopefully help to provide some colour as to what people are searching for. People can search for brands. So as I'm sure you know, you might, in the absence of typing in asos.com in full, you might just type ASOS into Google and then do brand searches. A lot of the time that is what people do. Or it might be that customers are doing category searches and searching for a product. So as I mentioned, white sofa earlier. Tangential searches, it might be that they're doing kind of combination searches, and might do white sofa and then actually I would like a white chair to match my white sofa, or a white table. And then competitor brand searches, it could be that they're looking to find kind of a close competitor to check on price, for example. So it might be that they're looking for competitors of yours on Google as well. So I mentioned earlier a little bit about website architecture in terms of how Google does that scan of your site. So this picture is actually very helpful because it shows the difference between a paid and an organic link. So you can see at the top there, LTA, that is a natural link. And it might be that there is, actually this picture doesn't show a sponsored link. I've misread the diagram, but it might be that there is a little tag saying sponsored at the top, which someone would have paid for that search. So in terms of how you can get as high as possible on the page, so I think one thing to say which is really important is that unless you're in the top 3 results, you won't get any clicks, largely because 90% of people click on the first 3. So it really is important to get as high up as you possibly can for relevant searches. So how do you do that? So the first thing, content strategy. So if you think about your business, what are the really important terms that you would want to rank for? Is it, if you're a furniture company, is it sofas? And within sofas, is it comfort? Is it different colors? Is it design? And really think about what terms you want to rank for that you think are important to your customers. And then once you have those, you can do all sorts of keyword research around it and say, right, well, this is what I think I'm good at from a product perspective, but this is what my customers are looking for, and therefore kind of match those and say, and this should dictate your content strategy for the website. So if it's all about floral for spring fashion, you should do, you can do a feature on florals. Or if within furniture, again, it's all about kind of mid-century or Victorian decor, you can do kind of an article on that. And I think it's really important to keep updating the content as well, not just have kind of lots of reasonably old information on the site, keeping it really current and updated. And then I did touch on website architecture earlier, so in terms of how it's built in the back end. So what's important there? I think mobile, as I'm sure we've all heard, is absolutely crucial. So if your site's working really well on desktop, but actually the mobile site's a bit rubbish, the pictures aren't rendering well, or the text isn't, I think that's really, really important. So mobile first design is super important, as well as page speed. So if your site takes a really long time to load, if you've got a lot of videos on there, or a lot of heavy images, that will definitely hold you back from how Google's ranking you, because that page load time is absolutely crucial to get as fast as possible to make sure that you're not disappointing any customers who wanted to get there. So other things like security and site structure and how URLs are structured. So a lot of the time there might be lots of duplicative content on a website. And so it's important that you kind of try and strip that out and make each page have a unique purpose. Then link strategy. So building links both within your site and external to your site adds value as well. So to try and get different organizations linking back to you, or linking through to all the different pages, either from your homepage or from a navigation, it's really important to get as many people as possible linking to the site so that it builds authority in Google's eyes. And then finally, user experience plays a role. So if customers have been on the site and actually have not spent much time on there, or the traffic looks to be fairly poor quality, or they've landed on the site and immediately left, that's what bounce rate means. Google will then think, well, that site's not particularly legitimate. There's all sorts of people landing on there and immediately bouncing off. We don't think it's particularly authoritative as a site. So that's important as well, to make sure that you're getting good quality visits and not kind of getting mixed up in any poor quality traffic harming your score. And then that's it from an SEO perspective, but happy to answer any further questions. I can see some popping up in the chat. But I'll close out by doing looking a bit more into budgeting. So for people who do have a budget, even if it's a small one, what could you do with it? So I think the big stat there in the big font is that the average small business only invests 1% in marketing, and I think that is sadly the reality for most businesses. But I think what is important is that if you do have a small amount, there are really things that you can do that would add value, and you can test it. So those kind of 1 to 4 pointers there, how could you decide what to do? So first things first, what do you have in the owned and earned media space? So do you have a really good presence on social media already? Do you have a solid email base? Is your website working really well? To try and do a bit of an audit there and see where you already have some real positives, and then try and fill in the gaps. In terms of point 2, I think it's really important not to forget this. In terms of, if you're going to spend some money, how are you going to measure success? That has to be a first question, because if you don't have a way of measuring performance or measuring success, you'll never know whether that money was well spent or not. So it could be that on Facebook, you're aiming for clicks. So you might invest some money on Facebook with a certain audience for advertising, and make sure that there's a really clear call to action. So it says, click here, shop now, read now, and then Facebook will track those number of clicks, and you can say, right, well, for every £1 I spent, I got 10 clicks to the website. So there's therefore a 10 to 1 return on my investment for that. And there are ways that you can, all digital marketing is measurable. So I think it's a really good way to put your money in, to start to test some things. And which brings me nicely on to test and learn. So very important to have kind of a control group, if you can, to make sure that you know what the actual impact is of that spend, and track it really, really closely. And if you've got enough budget to spend on multiple things, say multiple versions of a creative, really monitor that so closely that you can switch to the best performing one. There usually is one. And then in terms of outsourcing versus doing it yourself, as I'm sure you're familiar, obviously you can pay for expertise, but it does come at a cost. And I think I've mentioned social a huge amount already, but I think they're particularly geared towards small businesses. And so I think that's, if it was me, that's where I would start. In terms of building blocks, I probably won't talk through all of this, but you can read, definitely we'll send it out afterwards. But I guess that's just bringing together a few of the different tips I've mentioned to make your investment as effective as possible. So summing up, thinking about overall do's and don'ts. So I guess thinking about where we started is, what are your business objectives? So what are you trying to achieve with marketing? and what are the best channels? So taking a look at some of those slides I mentioned earlier and thinking, well, you know, I think the awareness of my brand is actually still pretty low. People don't really know about the service. So I think I want to focus on awareness, and therefore I think some of the best channels are social, search, etc. Thinking about customer insight, so putting the customer at the heart always. So, you know, what stage do you think that they might be at in that purchasing funnel? Do you know anything about their demographics, about their interests, about what they do on your website? There's all sorts of sources of information that you can pull together to really just get as much information as possible before you start with your marketing. And then website is obviously crucial from a search perspective, but also for customer experience. You know, always be on your website, checking it, looking at how it is through a customer's eyes. So, is it loading well on mobile? Is the site fast and effective? Is it easy to find what you want? Is purchasing seamless, or is it quite difficult? Can you get customer service really quickly and visibly on the site? And all of those kind of questions you should be asking yourself. And then finally, if I can impress anything, it would be test and learn. So I definitely wouldn't just go out and spend some money without having either a control group in place or a measurement plan in place where you know what impact you're expecting. And even if it maybe underperforms versus what you were hoping, or you've still learned something. And then don't waste your marketing spend by casting too wide a net. That's really important. On Facebook in particular, there's all sorts of targeting that you can do from an audience perspective. It almost gets a bit creepy and big brothery. You know, you can target people who are in a relationship, you can target people by their age, by who else they're following on Facebook, by their recent activity. There is a huge amount you can do there. So I would be as funneled and focused as possible. And then, yes, a very obvious one to finish on, but never underestimate the importance of digital, because that's where customers are. So thank you, and I will pause for questions. I can see a lot have come up.
Hi, Georgie. I just wanted to say thank you so much for running through that content. It was really excellent. And you're right, Melvin has asked some really comprehensive questions in the Q&A. So if anyone else has any, please do pop them on there. In the meantime, we'll come to address some that came through the Eventbrite registrations before moving on to Melvin's, which Melvin, I am quite happy to unmute you so you can provide the context to those, because you may have had some of them answered as Georgie moved through that content. So one of the questions we received in advance was, and Georgie, please do let me know if you feel this has been adequately covered, and maybe just reference the slide that those individuals can look back to after. What marketing platforms would give our charity the most appropriate reach? So obviously that's quite specific, and it will be very different to each organisation, and obviously specifically this sector. I don't know if you have an answer, or as I say, a slide to signpost that individual back to.
No, that is a good question, and I think I would journey back to probably this one in terms of looking at some of the different channels on one slide. But I think when we talk about reach, I'm assuming that the person who asked the question means they want to get volume of eyes on their website. And so I think it's important to consider where your audience is. So it's not necessarily a simple answer, because there's not one channel that says, oh, well, if you want the most volume of eyes on it as possible, then definitely go for Facebook. There's not kind of a simple answer. It depends on where you think your audience are. I have definitely hinted more towards social here, because that's where I would start if I was anybody else. Because I think, if I'm being completely brutally honest, Google search is a bit of a black box, and you can spend money there, which I don't think always is effective. And so for a small business, I would definitely start with social, because the targeting is more nuanced. You can be really targeted. So say if you're thinking about from a mental health perspective, what kind of criteria might you want to target by and deliver it? I think I think Facebook will have the answers. And also, you mentioned reach, this person mentioned reach, but actually is reach as important as targeted reach? I would question as well, because you might get lots and lots of eyes on it from, say, putting an ad, a paid ad out on the Daily Mail, but actually are they relevant for what the message that you're trying to put across? So I would encourage you to think customer first as opposed to just volume. And with that in mind, then choose your channel from this list in terms of where you think might best fit with your business objective and with the objective that you want the customer, the action you want the customer to take. But I do think Facebook, the Facebook suite, so whether that's Facebook or Instagram, is a good place to start.
Lovely, excellent. Another question fairly similar is about what's the best marketing strategy to sell a service?
For selling, I think I would point you towards kind of the middle section of this. So the consideration and selection, nurture and convert leads part. But I think from a conversion point of view, so you have to, I'm assuming then that customers have been on this journey, and I know I keep referring to this journey, but I don't think it's as simple as saying, I just want to sell my product, because actually you have to start with, I want people to be aware of my product, and then I want people to consider that it fits their needs, and then I want them to purchase. And so there's some really intelligent things you can do with that at that purchasing stage, where you say, okay, who has looked at my ads on social media? Who has engaged with them? So who's liking them? Who's clicking on my links? And then you take that pool of people and say, now I think they're ready to purchase. And so I'm going to put some advertising spend towards that more salesy type message. I think it's important to try not to just see it siloed like that. But yeah, I think traditionally it would be things in this middle section like emails and website advertising, as opposed to social, which can be seen as a bit more awareness and inspiration.
Lovely, thank you. And then the last question we received in advance, which is interesting in itself, a bit more nuanced. How, and this may be one that actually people, given that we're talking from the mental health sector, we're talking those groups with perhaps vulnerable service users, it may be a question that is better answered, and I certainly have a thought myself, better answered by those that are attending. So please do respond yourself in the chat box. This question said, how can we better incorporate the voices and experiences of service users without compromising anonymity and confidentiality? So as I say, it's a fairly nuanced question. I don't know if you had any thoughts, Georgie, or
Yes, I saw this one in advance and I was a bit stumped, but I think what I have seen other businesses do who are in a similar situation and want to preserve anonymity is you can use anonymous quotes. So it wouldn't be kind of a review in the traditional sense, but actually if there are individuals that you've got their permission to use to quote them, you could do that in an anonymized fashion and put that content on your site, would be my suggestion, but also open to other ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And the consideration I had was, if we're looking at user involvement and wanting to have those individuals at the heart of it, but they perhaps don't want to share their faces or their stories in those marketing channels you want to use, perhaps consider having those individuals review the content that you want to put out, that you've created yourself organically through other means, because they are essentially, Georgie's spoken a lot about that target customer. They are essentially your already mobilized target audience. So they can kind of speak to what your prospective target audience is looking for to attract them to your organization. So even if it's just a case of having a pool of service users who don't have to compromise or contribute anything personally identifying of themselves, but can kind of say, we like these colors, we like this approach, we like the way you've used these words. That might be one way to involve those individuals in your marketing endeavors. I'm just going to read through. So to address the comment that's come in the chat just then is from Kelly. She said, something we struggle with too. We do amazing support work, but we don't have photos or cases to share which don't break confidentiality. So yeah, there's lots of ways through it. And if anyone has any further ideas, do pop them in the messages. We received quite a few Q&As, or rather Qs, looking for As from Melvin. Melvin, I'm going to unmute you just in case you'd like to speak to them yourself. But Georgie, if while I do that, you could have a read through,
yeah, sure,
as he has written.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Hayley and Georgie. Yeah, I'm just thinking, and perhaps I've misunderstood or got this wrong, but what Georgie's been talking about is broadly about us communicating with individuals. And what I'm interested in is how I communicate and sell to organisations. So how does that all work, I suppose, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, we have a lot of other materials which are specifically geared towards B2B, which I'm very happy to share. But actually, I think there are a lot of, I guess, lessons within this 101 that can be applied to both. So I think this was intended as a broad introduction to digital marketing, which often makes sense to cite examples that are more direct to consumer, just because it brings it to life more easily. But I think that a lot of these lessons do apply in a business to business context as well. But instead of probably the Instagrams and Facebooks of the world, you can also advertise on LinkedIn, which isn't, I'm sure is an excellent business to business channel. And we do have a specific LinkedIn paid media guide, which I can share. That would be one of my first recommendations from a business to business perspective. But I would also say the partnerships, sponsorships piece, especially for small businesses and charitable ones like yours, is really important as a channel, which probably is underrepresented on slides. So when I was working for Arcadia Group, like over at Topshop, we like to do these sort of reciprocal partnerships with other charitable organisations, and I know that a lot of them are kind of those are huge players, but also just local businesses in your area that you think might be potential partners who have a social media following. Start small and just approach them on Instagram or on Facebook or on other channels and say, we would love if you could kind of do us a bit of a shout out on your social media. Is there anything that you can do kind of as a goodwill gesture, or anything that you can say, kind of trade with them on that? And I think building connections within your community and getting kind of some value in kind from them on their digital presences. To one of your other questions, Melvin, around building up a following on social media where you're starting from a low base, I think it's things like that, kind of those reciprocal relationships with local businesses who might have a bigger following than you and who might do it to help you out and kind of build that sense of community and connection.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm still uncertain. So if I want to sell my service to Deloitte, for example, the process that you've just been through doesn't make any sense. And I don't know who, for example, in Deloitte would be the appropriate person to approach. Definitely not you. But what I also know is that when we've tried this before, we get absolutely nowhere, because the people that are in charge of looking after social media aren't really interested in what other organizations are selling to them, or not even selling, but trying to promote and say, look, are you interested in this, like you would if you were buying a pair of shoes or some snips for your garden or something like that. And that's the bit that I really find difficult to understand how we do it. How do we even find those sorts of people? And I understand your point also about LinkedIn. It's a great tool, but unless you have to, how can I explain this? It's really difficult to say, okay, well, I'll fire out all this stuff and hope that it sticks to the right person in the Barclays or in Tesco's or where. It doesn't really matter where.
Yeah. I understand.
You just have to hope that they are on that platform, that they're listening to that radio station or whatever, which really draws you right the way back, I think, perhaps I'm wrong, and I hope to be put straight on this, is drives us all the way back to essentially finding out who the individual is concerned and just doing essential door-to-door going and knocking type stuff, which kind of starts to make this all seem a bit irrelevant in B2B. Or am I wrong?
No, I totally understand where you're coming from. If you've got a certain audience that you're looking to connect with, certain individuals, I can see why you see that this is less impactful. And I suppose where I would counter that is that you can search, you can search on LinkedIn. Certainly if you do a paid advert on LinkedIn, you can search by all levels of granularity. So you could search for small to medium-sized enterprises with 5,000 and below employees who work in procurement, say if it was a procurement team that you wanted to access. And so there is a lot of targeting that you can do within the corporate environment, which could help if you don't know the name of the person that you're looking to get to, and you have some budget to spend. I think that's paid only. So I can definitely share that LinkedIn paid
that would be really helpful, Georgie, please.
Yeah, no, I definitely can. But in terms of how to apply this to a business-to-business setting, I think there is definitely probably more I can say on that. So, for example, search is you can target businesses who are searching things like, corporate social responsibility or local charities to support in my area. And I think that comes down to the granularity of the targeting that you're doing. So clearly, my white sofa examples from earlier, you can't see the connection there. But if you think about searches within the charity context and within the kind of business charity context, there's almost certainly some terms that you could target which would be of relevance for you, for example, whether that is corporate social responsibility or mental health related terms, whether it's mental health charity, etc. That I think can have more application for you, and not they wouldn't specifically be targeting businesses, but I still think that audience would be of relevance. And I think certainly that beyond inspiration and consideration, when it comes to conversion of leads and how you're utilizing your emails and your website, hopefully a lot of that was resonating in any case, because it wasn't B2C specific. If you have kind of an email base of users, I would still stand by that's really important to nurture those leads and to connect with those people who you've had interactions with before, and optimizing your website and making sure it's kind of as SEO friendly as possible as well.
Yeah, thank you. There's some of the things that we're trying to do, but I think, yeah, it's not just as straightforward as all that, is it?
It's not. It's a process for sure. But there's a lot of actionable things that you can do. And I think there's a more detailed session on SEO that's coming actually. So I think there's a lot of further material that we can share in the coming webinars as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you both for going back and forth on that. That was really interesting to hear. I wonder if anyone else has anything. They haven't put anything. We've got a few minutes, just if Georgie had the time to answer anything else if it comes through. Whilst anyone does write that, I'll just say thank you so much to everyone for attending, for those that ask questions, and just for engaging in the content. And give you a bit of an update. Next week, we've an additional impromptu webinar on request on the considerations of returning to face-to-face delivery. So this is put on at very short notice by the association, and you should receive an invite. But if you're interested in that and you don't believe you have one, or perhaps you'd like to forward it with colleagues, please do get in touch with me. It's hayley@amhp.org.uk. Otherwise, I haven't seen anything else come in, so it's just for me to extend really great thanks to Georgie today and to Deloitte in the larger sense. and say that our webinar series will continue as it does on the 19th of May with a session on wellbeing delivered by Bupa. So those details will come to you shortly. And as Georgie said, we've some more marketing focus sessions, maybe with Georgie and members of her team as well, but certainly with Deloitte in the coming months too. Really appreciate, again, Georgie, your time and everybody else's, but I wish you all a lovely afternoon, and I will share the any reference materials that we've suggested in answering those questions, as well as the recording when it comes through. So thanks everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.